Hi. Thank you for joining me again. Evening Reads with Anna. I am Anna, and I work for the Santa Cruz Public Libraries, and I'm here to read to you. This is a story time that is intended for adults, so this is not intended for children. It won't get particularly gnarly, but it is most definitely not PG. Recently, Neil Gaiman has given blanket permission to providers to read his entire catalog for your benefit. And so I'm mildly obsessed with him and have decided to read to you Stardust. Some of you may know of it from the movie that was made based on the book, which is very fun and silly. But of course, as always, the book is better. I'm currently about to read chapter 2. If you haven't listened to chapter 1, please go ahead and do so. I will also have some questions at the end of the chapter for you to contemplate. Respond in the comments below, or just have a conversation with your friends and family about. At SCPL, we know that things are really hard right now. So we thought we would do this as a way to put something positive out there for you guys. But if you do need access to information or resources, please visit our website at santacruzpl.org to see what's going on. I'll be doing this once a week, reading a chapter from the book. Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. So chapter 2, in which Tristram Thorn grows to manhood and makes a rash promise. Years passed. The next fairy market was held on schedule on the other side of the wall. Young Tristram Thorn, 8 years old, did not attend, finding himself packed off to stay with extremely distant relations in a village a day's ride away. His little sister, Louisa, 6 months his junior, was, however, allowed to go to the market, and this was a source of great ranklement to the boy, as was the fact that Louisa brought back from the market a glass globe filled with speckles of light that glittered and flashed in the twilight, and which cast a warm and gentle radiance into the darkness of their bedroom in the farmhouse, while all Tristram brought back from his relatives was a nasty case of the measles. Shortly afterward, the farm cat had 3 kittens, 2 black and white ones like herself, and a tiny kitten with a dusty blue sheen to her coat, and eyes that changed color depending on her mood, from green and gold to salmon, scarlet, and vermilion. This kitten was given to Tristram to make up for missing the market. She grew slowly, the blue cat, and she was the sweetest cat in the world, until one evening she began to prowl the house impatiently, to growl, and to flash her eyes, which were the purple red of foxgloves. And when Tristram's father came back from a day in the fields, the cat yowled, bolted through the door, and was off into the dusk. The guards on the wall were for people, not cats, and Tristram, who was 12 by this time, never saw the blue cat again. He was inconsolable for a while. His father came into his bedroom one night and sat at the end of his bed, saying gruffly, "She will be happier over the wall, with her own kind. Don't you fret now, lad." His mother said nothing to him about the matter, as she said little to him on any subject. Sometimes Tristram would look up to see his mother staring at him intently, as if she were trying to tease some secret from his face. Louisa, his sister, would needle him about this as they walked to the village school in the morning, as she would goad him about so many other things. The shape of his ears, for example. The right ear was flat against his head and almost pointed. The left one was not, and about the foolish things he said. Once he told her that the tiny clouds, fluffy and white, that clustered across the horizon at sunset as they walked home from school, were sheep. It was no matter that he later claimed that he had meant simply that they reminded him of sheep, or that there was something fluffy and sheep-like about them. Louisa laughed and teased and goaded like a goblin, and what was worse, she told the other children and incited them to baa quietly whenever Tristram walked past. Louisa was a born inciter and danced circles around her brother. The village school was a fine school, and under the tutelage of Mrs. Cherry, the schoolmistress, Tristram Thorn learned all about fractions and longitude and latitude. He could ask in French for the pen of the gardener's aunt, indeed for the pen of his own aunt. He learned the kings and queens of England from William the Conqueror, 1066, to Victoria, 1837. He learned his reading and had a fair copperplate hand. Travelers to the village were rare, but occasionally a peddler would come through the village selling penny-dreadful accounts of grisly murders, fateful encounters, dire doings, and remarkable escapes. Most peddlers sold song sheets, 2 for a penny, and families would buy them and gather about their pianos to sing songs such as Cherry Ripe and In My Father's Garden. So the days went by, and the weeks went by, and the years went by also. At age 14, by a process of osmosis of dirty jokes, whispered secrets, and filthy ballads, Tristram learned of sex. When he was 15, he hurt his arm falling from the apple tree outside Mr. Thomas Forrester's house, more specifically, from the apple tree outside Miss Victoria Forrester's bedroom window. To Tristram's regret, he had caught no more than a pink and tantalizing glimpse of Victoria, which was his sister's, who was his sister's age, and, without any doubt, the most beautiful girl for 100 miles around. By the time Victoria was 17, and Tristram also, she was in all probability, he was certain, the most beautiful girl in the British Isles. Tristram would have insisted on the most beautiful girl in the entire British Empire, if not the world, and boxed you, or been prepared to, had you argued with him. You would have been hard-pressed to find anyone in Wall who would have argued with him, though. She turned many heads, and, in all probability, broke many hearts. A description. She had her mother's gray eyes and heart-shaped face, her father's curling chestnut hair. Her lips were red and perfectly shaped. Her cheeks blushed prettily when she spoke. She was pale and utterly delightful. When she was 16, she had fought vigorously with her mother, for Victoria had taken it into her head that she would work in the 7th Magpie as a pot-maid. "I have spoken to Mr. Bromios about this," she told her mother, "and he has no objection." "What Mr. Bromios thinks or does not think," replied her mother, the former Bridget Comfrey, "is neither here nor there. That is a most improper occupation for a young lady." The village of Wall watched the battle of wills with fascination, wondering what the outcome would be, for no one crossed Bridget Forrester. She had a tongue that could, the villagers said, blister the paint from a barn door and tear the bark from an oak. There was no one in the village who would have wanted to get on the wrong side of Bridget Forrester, and they did say that the Wall would be more likely to walk than for Bridget Forrester to change her mind. Victoria Forrester, however, was used to having her own way, and if all else failed, or even if it did not, she would appeal to her father, and he would accede to her demands. But here, even Victoria was surprised, for her father agreed with her mother, saying that working at the bar in the 7th Magpie was something that a well-brought-up young lady would not do. And Thomas Forrester set his chin, and there the matter ended. Every boy in the village was in love with Victoria Forrester, and many a sedate gentleman, quietly married with gray in his beard, would stare at her as she walked down the street, becoming for a few moments a boy once more, in the spring of his years with a spring in his step. "They say that Mr. Monday himself is counted amongst your admirers," said Louisa Thorne to Victoria Forrester one afternoon in May, in the apple orchard. 5 girls sat beside and upon the branches of the oldest apple tree in the orchard, its huge trunk making a fine seat and support, and whenever the May breeze blew, the pink blossoms tumbled down like snow, coming to rest in their hair and on their skirts. The afternoon sunlight dappled green and silver and gold through the leaves in the apple orchard. "Mr. Monday," said Victoria Forrester, with disdain, "is 45 years of age if he is a day." She made a face to indicate just how old 45 is when you happen to be 17. "Anyway," said Cecilia Hemstock, Louisa's cousin, "he has already been married. I would not wish to marry someone who had already been married. It would be," she opined, "like having someone else break in one's own pony." "Personally, I would imagine that to be the sole advantage of marrying a widower," said Amelia Robinson. "That someone else would have removed the rough edges, broken 'em in, if you will. Also, I would imagine that by that age, his lusts would long since have been sated and abated, which would free one from a number of indignities. A flurry of hastily suppressed giggles amid the apple blossom. "Still," said Lucy Pippin hesitantly, "it would be nice to live in the big house, and to have a coach and four, and to be able to travel to London for the season, and to Bath to take the waters, or to Brighton for the sea bathing, even if Mr. Monday is 45." The other girls shrieked and flung handfuls of apple blossom at her, and none shrieked more loudly or flung more blossom than Victoria Forster. Tristram Thorne, at the age of 17, and only 6 months older than Victoria, was half the way between a boy and a man, and was equally uncomfortable in either role. He seemed to be composed chiefly of elbows and Adam's apples. His hair was the brown of sodden straw, and it stuck out at awkward 17-year-old angles, wet and comb it howsoever much he tried. He was painfully shy, which, as is often the manner of the painfully shy, he overcompensated by being too loud at the wrong times. Most days, Tristram was content, or as content as a 17-year-old youth with his world ahead of him can ever be. And when he daydreamed in the fields, or at the tall desk at the back of Monday and Brown's, the village shop, he fancied himself riding the train all the way to London or to Liverpool, of taking a steamship across the gray Atlantic to America and making his fortune there among the savages in the new lands. But there were times when the wind blew from beyond the wall, bringing with it the smell of mint and thyme and red currants, and at those times there were strange colors seen in the flames in the fireplaces of the village. When that wind blew, the simplest of devices, from lucifer matches to lantern slides, would no longer function. And at those times, Tristram Thorne's daydreams were strange, guilty fantasies, muddled and odd, of journeys through forests to rescue princesses from palaces, dreams of knights and trolls and mermaids. And when these moods came upon him, he would slip out of the house and lie upon the grass and stare up at the stars. Few of us now have seen the stars as folks saw them then. Our cities and towns cast too much light into the night. But from the village of Wall, the stars were laid out like worlds or like ideas, uncountable as the trees in a forest or the leaves of a tree. Tristram would stare into the darkness of the sky until he thought of nothing at all, and then he would go back to his bed and sleep like a dead man. He was a gangling creature of potential, a barrel of dynamite waiting for someone or something to light his fuse, but no one did. So on weekends and in the evenings he helped his father on the farm, and during the day he worked for Mr. Brown at Monday and Brown's as a clerk. Monday and Brown's was the village shop. While they kept a number of necessities in stock, much of their business was conducted by means of lists. Villagers would give Mr. Brown a list of what they needed, from potted meats to sheep dip, from fish knives to chimney tiles. A clerk at Monday and Brown's would compile a master list of everything requested, and then Mr. Monday would take the master list and a dray, pulled by 2 huge shire horses, and he would set off for the nearest county town and return in a handful of days with the dray loaded high with goods of all description. It was a cold, blustery day in late October, of the kind that always seems about to rain, but never actually does, and it was late in the afternoon. Victoria Forster walked into Monday and Brown's with a list written in her mother's precise handwriting, and she rang the small bell on the counter for service. She looked slightly disappointed to see Tristram Thorne appear from the back room. "Good day, Miss Forster." She smiled a tight smile and handed Tristram her list. It read as follows: 1/2 pound of sago, 10 cans of sardines, 1 bottle of mushroom ketchup, 5 pounds of rice, 1 tin of golden syrup, 2 pounds of currants, a bottle of cochineal, 1 pound of barley sugar, 1 shilling box of Rowntree's elect cocoa, 3d10 of Oakey's knife polish, 60 of Brunswick Black, 1 packet of Swinburne's isinglass, 1 bottle of furniture cream, 1 basting ladle, a 9-penny gravy strainer, a set of kitchen steps. Tristram read it to himself, looking for something about which he could begin a talk. a conversational gambit of some kind, any kind. He heard his voice saying, "You'll be having rice pudding then, I would imagine, Miss Forrester?" As soon as he said it, he knew it had been the wrong thing to say. Victoria pursed her perfect lips and blinked her gray eyes and said, "Yes, Tristram, we shall be having rice pudding." And then she smiled at him and said, "Mother says that rice pudding in sufficient quantity will help to stave off chills and colds and other autumnal ailments." "My mother," Tristan confessed, "has always sworn by tapioca pudding." He put the list on a spike. "We can deliver most of the provisions tomorrow morning, and the rest of it will come back with Mr. Monday early next week." There was a gust of wind, then so strong that it rattled the windows of the village and whirled and spun the weathercocks until they could not tell north from west or south from east. The fire that was burning in the grate of Monday and Brown's belched and twisted in a flurry of greens and scarlets, topped with a fizz of silver twinkles of the kind one can make for oneself at the parlor fire with a handful of tossed iron filings. The wind blew from Faerie and the east, and Tristram Thorn suddenly found inside himself a certain amount of courage he had not suspected that he had possessed. "You know, Miss Forrester, I get off in a few minutes," he said. "Perhaps I could walk you a little way home. It's not much out of my way." And he waited, his heart in his mouth, while Victoria Forrester's gray eyes stared at him amused. After what seemed like 100 years, she said, "Certainly." Tristram hurried into the parlor and informed Mr. Brown that he would be off now, and Mr. Brown grunted in a not entirely ill-natured way and told Tristram that when he was younger, he'd not only had to stay late each night and shut up the shop, but that he had also had to sleep on the floor beneath the counter with only his coat for a pillow. Tristram agreed that he was indeed a lucky young man, and he wished Mr. Brown a good night, and he took his coat from the coat stand and his new bowler hat from the hat stand and stepped out into the cobblestones where Victoria Forrester waited for him. The autumn twilight turned into deep and early night as they walked. Tristram could smell the distant winter on the air, a mixture of night mist and crisp darkness and the tang of fallen leaves. They took a winding lane up toward the Forrester farm, and the crescent moon hung white in the sky, and the stars burned in the darkness above them. "Victoria?" said Tristram after a while. "Yes, Tristram," said Victoria, who had been preoccupied for much of the walk. "Would you think it forward of me to kiss you?" asked Tristram. "Yes," said Victoria bluntly and coldly, "very forward." "Ah," said Tristram. They walked up Deity's hill, not speaking. At the top of the hill they turned and saw beneath them the village of Wall, all gleaming candles and lamps glimmering through windows, warm yellow lights that beckoned and invited, and above them the lights of the myriad stars which glittered and twinkled and blazed, chilly and distant and more numerous than the mind could encompass. Tristram reached down his hand and took Victoria's small hand in his. She did not pull away. "Did you see that?" asked Victoria, who was gazing out over the landscape. "I saw nothing," said Tristram. "I was looking at you." Victoria smiled in the moonlight. "You are the most lovely woman in all the world," said Tristram from the bottom of his heart. "Get along with you," said Victoria, but she said it gently. "What did you see?" asked Tristram. "A falling star," said Victoria. "I believe they are not at all uncommon at this time of year." "Vicky," said Tristram, "will you kiss me?" "No," she said. "You kissed me when we were younger. You kissed me beneath the pledge oak on your 15th birthday, and you kissed me last May Day behind your father's cowshed." "I was another person then," she said, "and I shall not kiss you, Tristram Thorn." "If you will not kiss me," asked Tristram, "will you marry me?" There was silence on the hill, only the rustle of the October wind. Then a tinkling sound. It was the sound of the most beautiful girl in the whole of the British Isles, laughing with delight and amusement. "Marry you?" she repeated incredulously. "And why ever should I marry you, Tristram Thorn? What could you give me?" "Give you?" he said. "I would go to India for you, Victoria Forrester, and bring you the tusks of elephants and pearls as big as your thumb and rubies the size of wren's eggs. I would go to Africa and bring you diamonds the size of cricket balls. I would find the source of the Nile and name it after you. I would go to America, all the way to San Francisco, to the gold fields, and I would not come back until I had your weight in gold, and then I would carry it back here and lay it at your feet. I would travel to the distant Northlands, did you but say the word, and slay the mighty polar bears and bring you back their hides. I think you were doing quite well, said Victoria Forrester, until you got to that bit about slaying polar bears. Be that as it may, little shop boy and farm boy, I shall not kiss you, neither shall I marry you. Tristran's eyes blazed in the moonlight. I would travel to far Cathay for you and bring you a huge junk I would capture from the king of the pirates, laden with jade and silk and opium. I would go to Australia at the bottom of the world, said Tristran, and bring you, He ransacked the Penny Dreadfuls in his head, trying to remember if any of their heroes had visited Australia. A kangaroo, he said, and opals, he added. He was fairly sure about the opals. Victoria Forrester squeezed his hand. And whatever would I do with a kangaroo? She asked. Now, we should be getting along, or my father and mother will be wondering what has kept me, and they will leap to some entirely unjustified conclusions, for I have not kissed you, Tristran Thorn. Kiss me, he pleaded. There is nothing I would not do for your kiss. No mountain I would not scale, no river I would not ford, no desert I would not cross. He gestured widely, indicating the village of Wall below them, the night sky above them. In the constellation of Orion, low on the eastern horizon, a star flashed and glittered and fell. For a kiss and the pledge of your hand, said Tristran grandiloquently, I would bring you that fallen star. He shivered. His coat was thin, and it was obvious he would not get his kiss, which he found puzzling. The manly heroes of the Penny Dreadfuls and shilling novels never had these problems getting kissed. Go on, then, said Victoria, and if you do, I will. What? Said Tristran. If you bring me that star, said Victoria, the one that just fell, not another star, then I'll kiss you. Who knows what else I might do? There, now you need not go to Australia, nor to Africa, no, nor to far Cathay. What? Said Tristran. And Victoria laughed at him then, and took back her hand, and began to walk down the hill toward her father's farm. Tristran ran to catch her up. Do you mean it? He asked her. I mean it as much as you mean all your fancy words of rubies and gold and opium, she replied. What is an opium? Something in cough mixture, said Tristran, like eucalyptus. It does not sound particularly romantic, said Victoria Forrester. Anyway, should you not be running off to retrieve my fallen star? It fell to the east over there. And she laughed again. Silly shop boy. It is all you can do to ensure that we have the ingredients for rice pudding. And if I brought you the fallen star? Asked Tristran lightly. Would you give me a kiss? Your hand in marriage? Anything you desire, said Victoria, amused. You swear it? Asked Tristran. They were walking the last 100 yards now up to the Forrester's farmhouse. The windows burned with lamplight, yellow and orange. Of course, said Victoria, smiling. The track to the Forrester's farm was bare mud, trodden into mire by the feet of horses and cows and sheep and dogs. Tristran Thorn went down on his knees in the mud, heedless of his coat or his woolen trousers. Very well, he said. The wind blew from the east then. I shall leave you here, my lady, said Tristran Thorn, for I have urgent business to the east. He stood up, unmindful of the mud and mire clinging to his knees and coat, and he bowed to her, and then he doffed his bowler hat. Victoria Forrester laughed at the skinny shop boy, laughed long and loud and delightfully, and her tinkling laughter followed him back down the hill and away. Tristran Thorn ran all the way home. Brambles snagged at his clothes as he ran, and a branch knocked his hat from his head. He stumbled, breathless and torn, into the kitchen of the house on Westward Meadows. Look at the state of you, said his mother. Indeed, I never did. Tristran merely smiled at her. Tristran? Asked his father, who at 35 was still middling tall and still freckled, and although there were more than a few silvering hairs in his nut-brown curls. Your mother spoke to you. Did you not hear her? I beg your pardon, mother, said Tristran, but I shall be leaving the village tonight. I may be gone for some time. Foolishness and silliness, said Daisy Thorne. I never heard such nonsense. But Dunstan Thorne saw the look in his son's eyes. Let me talk to him, he said to his wife. She looked at him sharply. Then she nodded. Very well, she said. But who's going to sew up the boy's coat? That's what I would like to know. She bustled out of the kitchen. The kitchen fire fizzed in silver and glimmered green and violet. Where are you going? Asked Dunstan. East, said his son. East. His father nodded. There were two easts. East to the next county, through the forest, and east the other side of the wall. Dunstan Thorne knew, without asking, to which his son was referring. And will you be coming back? Asked his father. Tristram grinned widely. Of course, he said. Well, said his father, that's all right then. He scratched his nose. Have you given any thought to getting through the wall? Tristram shook his head. I'm sure I can find a way, he said. If necessary, I'll fight my way past the guards. His father sniffed. You'll do no such thing, he said. How would you like it if it was you was on duty, or me? I'll not see anyone hurt. He scratched the side of his nose once more. Go and pack a bag and kiss your mother goodbye, and I'll walk you down to the village. Tristram packed a bag, and his mother brought him 6 red, ripe apples, and a cottage loaf, and a round of white farmhouse cheese, which he placed inside his bag. Mrs. Thorne would not look at Tristram. He kissed her cheek and bade her farewell, and then he walked into the village with his father. Tristram had stood as his first watch on the wall when he was 16 years old. He had only been given one instruction, that it was the task of the guards to prevent anyone from coming through the gap in the wall from the village by any means possible. If it was not possible to prevent them, then the guards must raise the village for help. He wondered, as they walked, what his father had in mind. Perhaps the two of them together would overpower the guards. Perhaps his father would create some kind of distraction and allow him to slip through. Perhaps. By the time they walked through the village and arrived at the gap in the wall, Tristram had imagined every possibility except the one which occurred. On wall duty that evening were Harold Crutchbeck and Mr. Bromios. Harold Crutchbeck was a husky young man several years older than Tristram, the miller's son. Mr. Bromios's hair was black and curled, and his eyes were green, and his smile was white, and he smelled of grapes and of grape juice, of barley and of hops. Dunstan Thorne walked up to Mr. Bromios and stood in front of him. He stamped his feet against the evening chill. Evening, Mr. Bromios. Evening, Harold, said Dunstan. Evening, Mr. Thorne, said Harold Crutchbeck. Good evening, Dunstan, said Mr. Bromios. I trust you are well. Dunstan allowed, as that he was, and they spoke of the weather and agreed that it would be bad for the farmers, and that from the quantity of hollyberries and newberries already apparent it would be a cold, hard winter. And he listened to them talking. Tristram was ready to burst with irritation and frustration, but he bit his tongue and said nothing. Finally, his father said, Mr. Bromios, Harold, I believe you both know my son Tristram. Tristram raised his bowler hat to them nervously, and then his father said something he did not understand. I suppose you both know about where he came from, said Dunstan Thorne. Mr. Bromios nodded, without speaking. Harold Crutchbeck said something said he heard tales, although you never should mind half of what you hear. Well, it's true, said Dunstan, and now it's time for him to go back. There's a star, Tristram began to explain, but his father hushed him to silence. Mr. Bromios rubbed his chin and ran a hand through his thatch of black curls. Very well, he said. He turned and spoke to Harold in a low voice, saying things Tristram could not hear. His father pressed something cold into his hand. Go on with you, boy. Go and bring back your star, and may God and all his angels go with you. And Mr. Bromios and Harold Crutchbeck, the guards on the gate, stood aside to let him pass. Tristram walked through the gap, with the stone wall on each side of him, into the meadow on the other side of the wall. Turning, he looked back at the 3 men, framed in the gap, and wondered why they had allowed him through. Then, his bag swinging in one hand, the object his father had pushed into his hand in the other, Tristram Thorne set off up the gentle hill toward the woods. As he walked, the chill of the night grew less, and once in the woods at the top of the hill, Tristram was surprised to realize the moon was shining brightly down on him through a gap in the trees. He was surprised because the moon had set an hour before, and doubly surprised because the moon that had set had been a slim, sharp, silver crescent, and the moon that shone down on him now was a huge golden harvest moon, full and glowing and deeply colored. The cold thing in his hand chimed once, a crystalline tinkling like the bells of a tiny glass cathedral. He opened his hand and held it up to the moonlight. It was a snowdrop made all of glass. A warm wind stroked Tristran's face. It smelled like peppermint and blackcurrant leaves and red, ripe plums, and the enormity of what he had done descended on Tristran Thorn. He was walking into Fairy in search of a fallen star, with no idea how he would find the star, nor how to keep himself safe and whole as he tried. He looked back and fancied that he could see the lights of wall behind him, wavering and glimmering as if in a heat haze, but still inviting. And he knew that if he turned around and went back, no one would think any less of him for it, not his father, nor his mother, and even Victoria Forrester would likely as not merely smile at him the next time she saw him and call him shop boy, and add that stars, once fallen, often prove difficult in the finding. He paused then. He thought of Victoria's lips and her gray eyes and the sound of her laughter. He straightened his shoulders, placed the crystalline snowdrop in the top buttonhole of his coat, now undone, and too ignorant to be scared, too young to be awed, Tristran Thorn passed beyond the fields we know and into Fairy. And that's chapter 2. So, I hope you liked that. I really loved reading it to you guys. The questions that I would like to pose to you based on what we just heard is, why do you think that Tristran doesn't ever seem to wonder why his sister is only 6 months younger than him? And also, more fun question, if you were going to do some extravagant act to prove your adoration for someone you care about, what would you do? Tristran offers up several different suggestions on things that he could do, but what would you do? Please leave your replies in the comments below, or just have some fun talking about it. I really appreciate you joining me for Evening Reads with Anna. And again, please visit our website, santacruzpl.org, for access to more fun events and information and resources as these crazy times continue on. I'll see you guys next week for the next chapter. And I look forward to it. I'll see you then.